Imagine waking up to the biggest bombshell in pop culture history. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce officially engaged the internet, melting down Instagram, exploding millions of likes flooding in within minutes. But behind those perfect photos and smiling faces, there is a storm brewing, a storm so messy it drags in Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and even Justin Baldoni. And once you hear what I'm about to tell you, you will never look at this engagement the same way again. The world woke up today, and it felt like the sky itself cracked open because Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are officially engaged. And the way it dropped sent shockwaves across every corner of the internet, exploding timelines, crushing algorithms, and forcing millions to stop what they were doing and stare in disbelief. Because how could this happen so suddenly? How could something so massive, so history-defining be announced with nothing more than a few pictures and a single post? And yet those photos told a story deeper than any press conference could reveal? Because here was America's sweetheart, the woman who has written the soundtrack to an entire generation, standing with the NFL superstar down on one knee, surrounded by a jungle of flowers, a moment that felt like a fairy tale, but in reality, hid layers of chaos, betrayal, and fury bubbling underneath. Because while the fans screamed with joy and the likes soared into the millions in minutes, another group of people were seething in silence, watching everything they once held slip further and further away. And at the center of that storm was Blake Lively, a woman who had once called Taylor her sister, her soulmate, her best friend, and now found herself cut out of the most important day of her so-called best friend's life. And the pain of that rejection is something you can almost feel, echoing behind the smiles in those glossy engagement photos, because this is not just a love story. This is a war between loyalty and betrayal, between truth and lies, between those who will stand forever in the light and those who will forever be remembered as the ones who got exposed. Because when Travis Kelce got down on one knee, it was not just a proposal. It was a declaration. It was him saying to the world that he will protect Taylor from anyone and anything, even her oldest friends, even Hollywood royalty, even Ryan Reynolds himself, because the unfollow heard around the world proved that Travis is not here to play games. He is not here for fake friendships or backstabbing publicists. He is here to shield Taylor from the toxicity that tried to drag her down, and that is why this moment matters more than any concert, any album, any tour, because this is Taylor finally claiming happiness, finally demanding respect, finally choosing someone who chooses her. And as the applause rang out across timelines as fans gasped at the size of that ring, the truth was quietly whispering behind the headlines that not everyone is cheering, not everyone is celebrating. Because for every person screaming goals, there is someone else gnashing their teeth, watching their empire crumble, watching their carefully built lies collapse, and that tension, that darkness, that rage is what makes this story so much more than a proposal. Because this is not the end, this is only the beginning of something so much bigger, darker, and more dangerous than anyone is ready to admit. When the world saw that ring sparkle under the flood of flashbulbs and phone screens, it was more than a diamond. It was a signal, a weapon, a declaration of power. Because Taylor Swift, the woman who had survived the trenches of Hollywood betrayal, music industry sabotage, and every cruel headline thrown her way, had finally aligned herself with a man who understood loyalty. Not the performative kind, not the staged red carpet smiles, but the kind that cuts ties when necessary, the kind that burns bridges to protect the one person who matters. And this act of devotion, this ring wrapped in flowers, was also a line drawn in the sand that left Blake Lively standing on the other side alone. Because for years, Blake had basked in the glow of proximity to Taylor. She had laughed at dinners. She had posed for pictures. She had whispered secrets during sleepovers that felt like sisterhood carved in stone. But behind those smiles, there was another current one that fans only began to glimpse when the unfollows began, when the whispers of publicist games surfaced, when Ryan Reynolds' strategic silence started to feel less like loyalty and more like calculation. And in Hollywood, timing is everything, and the timing of this engagement could not be more brutal, because while Taylor stood on the edge of forever with a man who had proven his love, Blake stood on the edge of irrelevance, her name entangled in headlines. She could not control her reputation swirling in scandals connected to Justin Baldoni, connected to a film that was supposed to be art, but became a battlefield of lawsuits, rumors, and silence that spoke louder than any press release. And the cruelest cut of all is that this engagement announcement was not random, Not accidental, it was surgical. Because Taylor knows the weight of timing. She knows how to turn personal triumph into cultural dominance. She knows how to drown out noise with a symphony of cheers, and when she dropped those photos on Instagram, 10 minutes later, they were already bigger than any lawsuit, any scandal, any betrayal, and that is why Blake felt the earth shake under her feet, because her own story, her own narrative, her own crafted image had been swallowed whole by the radiant glow of Travis kneeling on one knee and saying forever. And what makes this moment sting even more is the way fans responded, because fans do not forget. Fans archive every detail, every photo, every friendship bracelet, and when they saw this engagement, they remembered the podcasts, the interviews, the tiny details that showed Travis defending Taylor, publicly cutting ties with people who disrespected her, and they contrasted that with Blake, with the whispers about betrayal, with the awkward silences, with the lack of support during the storm, and the conclusion was unavoidable. Blake is out and Taylor has moved on, and now the internet has moved on too. Because in the world of celebrity currency, loyalty is everything. And once trust is broken, there is no coming back. And as the millions of likes surged as hashtags trended across every platform, another quieter movement began. Fans began to connect dots. They began to remember the interviews where Travis hinted at commitment, the subtle lyrics Taylor dropped about true love, the sudden silence from certain Hollywood friends, and they realized this was not spontaneous. This was planned. This was a carefully executed chapter. One of a larger book. A book where Taylor reclaims control of her circle, her story, her empire, and leaves behind anyone who stood in the way. And that is why this proposal is more than romance. It is strategy. It is vengeance dressed as love. It is a public execution of old alliances that failed to stand the test of loyalty. And at the very center of that broken circle sits Blake, lively watching from the shadows as the applause grows louder, as the likes climb higher, as her own silence becomes heavier, because she knows the wedding of the century is coming, and she will not be there, and the symbolism of her absence will scream louder than any interview, any denial, any carefully worded statement. Because when Taylor walks down that aisle, she will not just be walking toward Travis. She will be walking away from Blake, away from betrayal, away from a chapter that has been burned closed forever. And as the petals fell in that garden, as Travis held her hand, as the cameras captured forever in a single frame, Hollywood itself shifted power, tilted alliances crumbled, and the future became clear. The Swiftie empire just crowned its king, and anyone who doubted their reign just learned how ruthless love can be. And as the echoes of applause from that engagement continued to ripple across every corner of the internet, another sound began to grow louder. The sound of silence. The silence of friends who once stood at the forefront, but suddenly vanished from the frame. The silence of Blake Lively, whose Instagram stories once lit up with playful hints about her bond with Taylor, but now stood empty, void, cold, and the silence of Ryan Reynolds, whose carefully curated humor once placed him at the center of every cultural moment, but now seemed muted, calculated as though every word could become ammunition against him. And in that silence, fans began to dig deeper, to rewind the tape, to replay old interviews, to re-examine photos that now looked staged, forced, rehearsed like masks, slowly slipping. And the more they looked, the more they saw cracks. Because the truth is, Hollywood thrives on illusion, but illusions cannot withstand betrayal. And betrayal, once exposed, does not just wound, it destroys. And that is exactly what fans saw unraveling in front of them, a friendship once painted as unbreakable, now rotting from the inside out, because while Taylor had fought battles in broad daylight, Blake had played games in the shadows, her publicist, weaving stories, her team orchestrating narratives that twisted sympathy into suspicion, that tried to bury scandals under a mountain of polished headlines. But truth is relentless, it seeps through the cracks. It waits patiently, and when the moment is right, it detonates, and that detonation came not with an article, not with a scandal sheet, but with a ring. A proposal that turned the entire spotlight away from lies and onto love. And in that blinding light, the shadows of Blake Lively's choices became impossible to hide. Fans who once adored her began questioning her loyalty, her silence, her absence, because silence in moments of triumph is not neutral. It is loud, it is deafening, it is a confession without words. And as those questions grew louder, another name began to surface. Justin Baldoni, the man tied to Blake through a film project that was supposed to uplift, but instead became a battlefield of accusations, of lawsuits, of narratives that painted him not as a hero, but as a manipulator. And Blake, by proximity, became entangled in that storm, her reputation chained to his downfall. And when fans connected those dots, the image shattered further because the idea that Blake could stand by while chaos unfolded, while friends were betrayed, while loyalties were tested and still choose. Silence was too much to forgive, and Hollywood has no patience for the unforgivable. Because in this town, timing is currency. Loyalty is currency, and betrayal is bankruptcy. And right now, Blake Lively is bankrupt. She is standing on the edge of cultural exile, watching as her relevance evaporates. Watching as the internet redirects its devotion to Taylor and Travis and the empire they are building together. And this exile is not sudden. It is not accidental. It is the result of years of choices, years of silence, years of aligning with people who were not built to withstand the truth. And now as that truth spreads like wildfire across platforms, across headlines, across every conversation, in living rooms and group chats, Blake is discovering the cruelest lesson of all that once loyalty is broken. No empire, no publicist, no amount of charm can rebuild it. Because the internet remembers, and the internet never forgives. And as the dust settled, from the explosion of that engagement announcement, Hollywood itself seemed to tilt. Because this was no ordinary love story. This was not just another celebrity headline. This was a shift in power dynamics, a reminder that while some cling desperately to fading relevance, others are writing history in real time. And it became clearer with every passing hour that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce were not just celebrating a personal milestone, they were cementing themselves as a dynasty, as a brand, as a cultural empire that would redefine entertainment, sports, and media. While in the shadows, the cracks in Blake Lively's facade grew wider, because the silence was no longer just silence. It was evidence. It was indictment. It was proof that when truth surfaces, those who once basked in proximity to power can be obliterated by it. And fans did not hesitate. They dissected her every move, her every absence, her connections to Justin Baldoni, whose name itself has become entangled with lawsuits, whispers of manipulation, stories that refuse to stay buried. And the more people dug, the more they questioned what role Blake really played. Was she a bystander? Was she a participant? Was she a co-architect of the cover-ups? And as those questions gained traction, even the most loyal defenders hesitated, because in Hollywood, perception is truth. And perception had turned against her like a tide too powerful to resist. And the irony was impossible to ignore, because for years Blake and Ryan were painted as Hollywood's perfect couple. The witty banter, the red carpet charm, the friendship with Taylor sold like a fairy tale. But fairy tales are fragile, and the moment the illusion cracked, the audience no longer saw magic. They saw strategy. They saw calculation. They saw betrayal. And now as Taylor stepped into the spotlight with a ring on her finger, glowing in love and power, the contrast was damning, because nothing exposes a mask faster than authenticity, and nothing isolates betrayal faster than true loyalty. And Travis had proven loyalty in ways that Hollywood rarely sees. He cut ties, he unfollowed, he drew lines in the sand without hesitation, and fans rewarded him for it. Because in a culture drowning in fakery, realness is priceless, and that realness highlighted just how artificial Blake and Ryan's image had become once a brand. Now a question mark. And the question that loomed largest was simple. How long before the industry turns its back entirely? How long before casting calls dry up, brand deals retreat, endorsements evaporate, because corporations crave alignment with power, not scandal? And right now, power belongs to Taylor and Travis. And that power is growing daily, amplified by headlines, by fan obsession, by the narrative of love that even the harshest critics struggled to dismiss. And in contrast, Blake finds herself boxed in, trapped by her own silence, unable to reclaim the narrative because every word now sounds defensive. Every post now reads like damage control. Every move is scrutinized through the lens of betrayal. And when Hollywood smells weakness, it does not wait. It attacks, it replaces, it discards. And that discard pile is brutal. Littered with once adored names who thought they were untouchable, but discovered too late that relevance is fragile, and loyalty is currency, and betrayal is bankruptcy. And as this cycle unfolded in real time, with millions watching and dissecting, it became clear that the collapse of Blake Lively was not a sudden storm, it was a slow erosion, years in the making. Accelerated by one engagement, one proposal, one moment of love that turned into a spotlight of truth. And the internet lit the match, and Hollywood let it burn. And as the waves of speculation transformed into tidal forces sweeping across platforms, timelines, headlines, and whispered conversations in boardrooms, it became undeniable that the engagement of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce was not just a love story. It was a cultural earthquake that ripped through the very fabric of Hollywood, exposing the hypocrisy, the betrayal, the manipulations that had been carefully hidden for years. And in that exposure, Blake Lively stood frozen, her once flawless image cracking under the unbearable pressure, because while she and her publicist scrambled desperately to rewrite the narrative, to paint her silence as dignity, to rebrand her absence as privacy, the public was not fooled. The public saw betrayal. The public saw cowardice. The public saw an actress who had every chance to stand by a friend who had given her light and support, but chose instead to vanish into silence. And when silence screams louder than words, reputations crumble like glass. And this glass was shattering into a million pieces, cutting through every fabricated headline, every staged smile, every old clip that now looked like a performance. Not a friendship, and fans are merciless once they see the truth. They do not forgive. They do not forget, they amplify. They dissect. They drag, until the entire illusion collapses. And that collapse was unfolding in real time. Because while Taylor was lifted higher than ever, surrounded by loyalty, love, and triumph, Blake was sinking, chained to Justin Baldoni, whose name became poison in the industry. Lawsuits circling, accusations, boiling whispers, transforming into headlines that would not die down. And with each connection, fans unearthed Blake's image darkened further her brand, infected by association. Her silence painted not as grace, but as guilt. And guilt in Hollywood is fatal because it lingers, it festers, it drives casting directors to look elsewhere, it forces brands to pull contracts, it pushes the once adored into the shadows of irrelevance. And once irrelevance takes hold, it rarely lets go because Hollywood feeds on relevance. It feeds on the next big thing, the next cultural icon, the next dynasty. And that dynasty had already arrived in the form of Taylor and Travis, whose every public moment, every glance, every hand held became a viral spectacle, a love story turned cultural revolution. And this revolution left no space for betrayal, no space for silence, no space for those who had aligned themselves with the wrong players. And so Blake finds herself cornered, every move exposed, every motive questioned, every smile doubted. And in that corner, the reality sets in. There is no way back, because betrayal once revealed is irreversible. Loyalty, once broken, is unrecoverable. And the internet once turned against you is merciless. And so we watch as Hollywood rewrites itself in real time. We watch as Taylor and Travis ascend unstoppable, building an empire, not just on love, but on loyalty, on authenticity, on the very things Blake and her circle tried to manipulate and failed. And the irony burns through every headline because it was not a scandal that destroyed Blake. It was a silence. It was an absence. It was a betrayal too obvious to ignore. And now, as fans chant their devotion to Taylor, as brands scramble to align with Travis, as the cultural narrative cements itself, one truth remains unshakable. The rise of authenticity means the death of illusion, and Blake Lively, once the embodiment of Hollywood's perfect illusion, is now the cautionary tale, the warning, the collapse that everyone saw coming. But she never believed would happen until it was too late. And now, as the dust settles and the storm begins to quiet, one truth stands like a shadow that cannot be erased: the story of Blake Lively. Her silence, her betrayal, her fall will forever remain a scar on Hollywood's golden surface, because while Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce continue to rise, fueled by loyalty, authenticity, and an empire built on love, Blake will remain trapped in the memory of what she could have been and what she chose to abandon. Because silence is never neutral. It is a weapon. And in choosing silence, she cut ties with the very force that once held her high above the crowd. And now that force has turned its gaze elsewhere, leaving her stranded in a place where apologies are too late and redemption is impossible. The court of public opinion has already spoken, and its verdict is unforgiving. The betrayal has been carved into stone, and no statement, no headline, no staged appearance will ever rewrite it, because Hollywood thrives on stories, and this story is no longer hers. It belongs to Taylor and Travis. It belongs to the millions who watched, who felt, who remembered every act of betrayal, every whisper of manipulation, every mask that slipped until nothing remained but the raw truth. And that truth is merciless because it crowns some as icons and buries others as cautionary tales. And so as the lights fade and the world moves forward, one image will linger, a warning etched in memory that no empire survives on lies. No friendship can withstand betrayal, and no silence will ever save those who choose to abandon loyalty when it matters most.